At this point, you have a basic idea for what you want to build in this class for your final project. And you may improve that and change that as you get feedback from me and your peers this week, but you at least have something to run with. So for me, I have this example project idea of a to-do application that lets me collect a bunch of tasks in a list, allows me to complete tasks, and allows me to have a filter button that allows me to say, oh, I only want to see complete tasks or incomplete tasks. So I'm going to run with this idea and demo what I want you to do for this week's milestone for your final project. And the milestone this week involves 3 planning tasks. So one planning task is wireframing, so that we can start getting an idea of the flow of your application. Another is a Kanban board, which is a popular workflow for organizing tasks. And the third is creating a skeleton application. So you're not actually building all of the logic of your application, but you're kind of mocking out some components and documenting what those components should do. So I'm going to start with the whiteboard, and I have an article that I'll have linked that explains what whiteboarding is, the purposes of whiteboarding, different levels of fidelity. And what we're aiming for in this stage is a low fidelity mockup that shows the flow of an application. So it's going to be something like this, where you're going to have screens and captions beneath them, and you're going to sort of orchestrate them in a sequence to illustrate the main interaction of your application. So for mine, the main interaction of the application is adding to-dos and marking them as complete. So I'm going to sketch out a flow of that. So if you're making a journaling app, you want to focus on the flow of creating a new journal entry. If you're making a cooking application, you probably want to focus on the flow of entering in a new recipe to the app, or the flow of someone following a recipe within your app. The goal at this stage is not to map out every single possible interaction and screen in your application, but really just kind of hone in on what is the main interaction in your application. And the point of this is planning will save you hours of time in terms of development. So even if you're not a designer, this planning process is still really important to go through. And even doing a simple sketch, like at this level of fidelity, gives us an idea of the types of components we want to build and the way we want to organize those components. If we don't do this step, we will end up oftentimes building components we don't need, or building the components we do need, but building them in the wrong way. And with wireframing, it's not about creating a beautiful design on paper, but it is about trying to think about the layout and flow of your application. You can use whatever tools you want to map this out. So if you're comfortable with digital tools, go for it. If pencil and paper is your jam, that's great. I'm going to do a quick demo in Microsoft Whiteboard, which is not necessarily the software I would recommend, but is easy software for me to demo with. So I'm making this to-do application. Let me grab a pen. And what I want to start doing is mapping out screens. And I'm going to think kind of mobile first. So I'm going to pick a screen that's kind of like the portrait of a mobile phone. This will be my frame. Whoops. Let's try that one more time. And I'm going to have some kind of header at the top that has the name of my application, and maybe has like a little settings icon, a little gear, and this will have some kind of background color to it, or background image. So I'm just gonna shade that in very sketchily here. And the application, probably for me, the most important thing is for a user to be able to add a new task. So I'm imagining a user showing up here for the first time, and they will have an add task button up at the top. And I will also probably need that filtering feature that I was imagining my application will have. So draw a little filter icon here. And then I imagine that I will put the tasks when the user has entered them into the application in a vertical sequence here. But let me get rid of those. So we're going to map out the flow of what it looks like to add those. So I'm not going to have any when I show up to the app for the first time. So I've got the first screen, and then I'm going to add a caption below it that says this is the landing page for new user without any tasks. And then what I want to map out is the flow. So at this point, I will, since I'm using digital tools, I can do this. But I'm just going to like grab a copy of this first screen. Let's do that one more time. Come on, copy the whole thing. And we're moving from one screen to the next here. So what I'm imagining is that in between these two screens, the user has clicked on Add Task. So click Add Task. And on this screen then, what I want to happen is that a window pops up on the screen, and it's a modal window, so the rest of the application should dim out at this point. So I'm going to use the highlighter here. And indicate that this is all kind of dimming out by shading it in slightly. And what this modal window is going to have is a little text area for the user to enter in their task, like make some coffee. And then there will be an add button and a cancel button inside of this pop-up window. So I'm going to note this down here. This is a modal window. Pops up for user to enter a new task. And I'm going to go to my next screen, which is where someone has entered some text and hit the add button. So click add button. Let's get a copy of this screen. Oh boy. Let's copy this and then paste it. Okay, give me 1 second to deal with the digital tools. Copy and pasting in this application is a bit annoying with a tablet. Okay, so they've clicked the add button, and what I will have on this screen then is the first item listed in my list view. So it should now say make some coffee. And this will be my list view of all tasks with a checkbox to complete. So same deal, I want to kind of keep moving forward with mapping out the application. I've got the flow for adding one task. So I am just going to jump forward to the user having multiple tasks. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in. Say user adds more tasks. And it might be go grocery shopping. Go for a run. Brainstorm dinner ideas. Etc. And so then I'll have this list view, lists all tasks vertically. And what I want to do is now show the flow for marking a task is complete. So we've added a task, we've added a sequence of tasks. So let me copy this screen over. And say user toggles task complete. And let's have the user make some coffee. So a checkbox will show up and we will add a strike through to the text so the formatting will change. And we can say when task is complete, a check appears, and the text style changes. Okay, so let's zoom out. We've got this flow of a few screens that goes from nothing in the application to adding a task, to adding a couple tasks, to toggling a task complete. And I think maybe to round this out, I'll show what the filter might look like. So the filter part of the application would allow me to filter this so that I could just see the incomplete tasks, the complete tasks, or all the tasks. So I'm going to grab, get my lasso out, grab this. And let's say user opens filter. So if the user clicks on the filter button, then I want to have a drop down here that pops open. Let me get my eraser out. And in this filter, there should be 3 options at least. Should have all, complete, and incomplete. And for my caption here, I'm going to say filter drop down has options for showing all, complete, incomplete. So last frame here that we'll do together, I'm going to grab this, copy, paste. You know what? I'm going to go back a screen so that I have the screen without the filter open. User picks incomplete. And what I'm just going to do here is change this, whoops, too much. And I lost my E here for the word incomplete. And simulate what it would look like with that complete item now hidden. So this will say filter shows only the incomplete tasks now. Okay, so zooming out, we've got this flow across 7 little wireframe mocks, and none of this is pretty, and that's kind of intentionally the point, is that you're not spending a lot of time on your visual fidelity. You're just trying to map out the layout of the pages and the interaction across those pages. So I could map out more here. Like if I wanted to, I could map out what the settings page looks like, and have another set of flows down here that kind of like goes through the settings and what toggling maybe like the theme, like light or dark in the setting does for the application. But I'm going to omit that because really for this, I want you to focus on just the main interaction for your application. And you're going to be creating a flow that looks like this, where you've got screens with captions underneath them, and they're kind of connected in a sequence. If your application happens to be like a choose your own adventure game, you could have, your main screen, and then there are like 2 branches based on what the user does, whether they click on one thing or another. If that's relevant, you can structure your mockup this way, your wireframe mockup, as long as it still has the same structure of captions and screen mocks. So you can map this out using whatever tool you want. If I were doing this for a client, I might be using a tool called Figma or Adobe XD, but you can use pencil and paper. Pencil and paper, I actually highly encourage that, because pencil and paper, it's disposable. You can write you can divide your paper up into like 6 to 10 little boxes and just go crazy sketching out different alternatives. And they're all cheap, they're all easy, they're all disposable. So you can iterate through ideas quickly. But once we have a whiteboard like this, and this isn't part of this assignment, but what you can do is take a look at one of your screens, like this screen here. I know that I'm going to need a header element, and I'm going to need like the main area, and the main is probably going to need some buttons at the top, and then I'm going to have a list with list items in it. So the idea with getting your wireframe mock down on the page is that you can start thinking about the HTML elements and the components that you're going to need to build to make this application. Okay, so that's it for the whiteboard demo. What I want to show you now is something called Kanban. So I'm going to switch back to the browser and go to GitHub. And you'll have created your GitHub account at this point, so you can create a new repository inside of GitHub for your final project. So I'm going to go through there are a couple ways to do this. I'm going to go through the same way that I did in the previous GitHub video. I am going to go to where I am storing all my projects for this class. So Code Sprint, I'm going to open up a Windows terminal here. Or you can, open up your terminal, type in CD, and grab your folder. Paste it in, hit enter to change to that directory. PWD will tell you the present working directory, so you can verify that you're there, and you can use ls to see what's in there. So what I'm going to do is run create React app. So I'm going to do npx create React app final project demo. And I'm going to pause the video for a second while that runs. So that finished, and that gave me this project folder here, which I can open up with Visual Studio Code by right-clicking here and opening with code, or I can cd into that folder and then type code period to end up in that folder in Visual Studio Code, and just verify that it's all set up correctly. I can do npm run start, which should load the default application that we saw a while back when we made our first React application. There we go. So I'm going to kill this, stop this running, kill the terminal. I'm going to minimize Visual Studio and get rid of my terminal and open up GitHub Desktop. So I am going to go to File, Add Local Repository, and create React app projects are set up as a Git repository locally. So what we just need to do is click on this folder to select it. So my final project demo, add repository, and then this is set up with an initial commit from using create React app, which I can then click publish this repository. So I can say code sprint a final project demo to do app. And it's really important that you make sure that you keep this code private. So this should be public code so that I can look into your repository easily and check everything that you've submitted. So name it however you like, add your description, hit publish repository. This should take a second and push some things to GitHub. And then you should be able to go repository view on GitHub to find your project on GitHub. And it should have your source and public folder. It should not have your node modules folder because of this git ignore that is ignoring files that shouldn't be in version control. So we've got our project in here. And we went through that process so that then we could create a Kanban board associated with this project. So over in the Projects tab, I can create a new project and call this the final, or let's call it Code Sprint A. And if this is a project that you take forward to B and C, you'll be able to create separate boards for each of those classes. And then the template, you've got a couple of options. The one that we're going to use is the basic Kanban. So select that template, create project. And what this gives you is a very simple Kanban board where you can enter cards like there are a couple defaults here. Move them from track to track. So you've got a to-do track, an in-progress track, and a done track. And the idea with Kanban is that you keep a backlog of all your tasks, and when you have capacity to work on them, you pull them over to your in-progress. You try to limit how many things you're working on at one time, and when you finish one, you move it over to your done track. So I would keep working through the week and sort of add cards as I have time to my in progress and then mark them as done when they're done. So let me get rid of these defaults here. These have some useful information about how to use the cards, but we're going to create some cards from scratch. So the idea with the Kanban board is to try to come up with our to-do list in really small atomic units that are easy for us to put into our in-progress column, work on, and finish. So something like a card where I just said finish the app is a horrible card for me to add here because it's ambiguous. Like, what does finish mean? And it's hard to like conceptualize what I need to do for this task to actually move it from in progress to done. So let me get rid of this. So instead, what we might have a card for, and you should have a card for this because it's one of your tasks for this week, is wireframe the main interaction. Oh, I can't type. And add that card. So the syntax here that you can use inside of your cards, so I can edit my card here, is called GitHub flavored markdown. So if you pull up a reference for GitHub flavored markdown, you can see some of the syntax you can use. Like I can put 2 asterisks around the text to indicate that that text should be bold. 1 asterisk around the text to make it italicized, I mean. I can insert lists by just doing a dash at the start. So maybe I want to add some more information here. Wireframing the main interaction meant adding a to-do or adding a task to the list, adding multiple tasks, filtering, or what did we do? We marked task as complete and filtered for incomplete tasks. And now you've got a card that has a lot of information on it. So it's really clear to look at this and be like, oh, did I do this task? Did I wireframe all of these 4 things? Great. Then I can move it over to the done column. So as you're filling out your Kanban board for this week, try to think of small chunks of work that you can add here. So for instance, one to do could be create or use create React app to generate a project template. Push the project template to GitHub. And these are 2 things that I've already done, so I'm going to just move them over to the done column here. What else do we need? So for our application, what we might do is start thinking about some of the components we're going to need to build and listing them here. So I might want to create a header component, and I'll list out the things that should have. So it should have the title, it should have settings button. Okay, well, we just learned something together. Don't use HTML syntax in here. So because I used HTML syntax, it interpreted that as HTML. So don't do that. So create a header component, title settings button. I might then say like, oh, I need to create an unstyled version of my settings page. And that should feature, and I might list what I want on here. So a theme drop down to change the styling of the application, and maybe a button that lets me clear all of my user data. And specifically, I'm trying to break this down for the settings page into an unstyled version where I can just focus on getting the content in there. And then I can also create one that is a task for style the settings page. So I'll keep going here and demo a few more things that we might need to create. So create an app component with routing for showing a list page, showing a settings page. I'm going to probably need to create a to-do component that can render a single to-do item. With a checkbox next to it. I'll probably need to create a to-do list component that can render a series of to-do components. And I'll say that this uses an array of mock data. So not necessarily trying to work on the component that can respond to changing data, like someone being able to add it over time. But here I just want to make a version of this component. I can give it an array and it will render that array. And maybe I'll also need to create a new to-do form component that allows the user to enter text and hit either add or cancel buttons. So this, I could keep going. There's a whole lot more that we might need to add here for building this application, like adding some tasks that allow me to toggle the to-do component, like making sure that when we toggle it, the styling changes, setting up this filter drop down, making sure that the filter applies to the page. The idea here is just try and enumerate as many as you can think about or as you can think of for your application. And then once you've done that, come back through here and sort them so that you've got the most important or the highest priority ones at the top. So for me, it might be I want to create this app that has routing for a list page and a settings page first, and then maybe I want to create this individual to-do component with the checkbox next, and then I want to create this to-do list component that uses this to-do component, and then I want to create the new to-do form, and then maybe I'll start thinking about creating the unstyled version of my settings page, styling my settings page, and creating a header. So then through the week, now that I've got this backlog of things that are easily defined, I can pull them out one at a time into my in progress, work on them, and then finish them. So Kanban, this workflow, there are a lot of different workflows that you can adopt, but the general idea is to allow you to focus on specific tasks. So you're doing the work to define what your tasks are, and then you're able to see them move over time. And this is really helpful when especially when you're collaborating. So like for me, I'm kind of your project manager of snooping in on your board and seeing where you are. throughout the next couple of weeks. But it's also something you can use if you're collaborating on a project with someone to have all of these cards listed out and see who's working on them at any moment in time and sort of see the workflow for the team over the week. Okay, so we saw the whiteboard, we saw how to create our repository using Create React App and set up our Kanban board, and then the last thing I want you to do for this planning step is actually start building the skeleton of your application. So the idea with the skeleton is that I'm not really focusing on all of the complicated interactive logic just yet, but I'm thinking about what are the components that I'm going to need. I'm going to try and create stubs or mocks of those components, have them in my application documented so that when I come back and start working on building out the logic, I already have kind of mapped out at a high level all of the things that I'm going to need. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code again. I'm going to start up Create React App. And this gave us a project that had an index that used React DOM to render something to the root element of our page, and it had some default CSS and default components. So what I would do here is, run it, make sure that it runs, and then I'm going to blow away all of this, and we're going to start fresh like we did when we were building the application together in the tutorials. So I'm going to create a new index.js and an app file in a components folder, and get a React functional component here for my app. I'll document this, and this structure is called JSDoc, where it starts with 2 stars. You don't have to use this. You can use just a regular multi-line comment. I just have an extension installed that makes it easy to do JSDocs here. So I'm going to make a note. The app is responsible for routing and loading the appropriate page within the application. So I've got a basic app here. In my index, I'm going to import React from React, because anywhere we use JSX, we need to import React. I also need React DOM from React DOM, and then I can render React DOM, my app, to the root element on the page. Gotta make sure that I import my app here. And remember, in public, in index.html, that's where the root element is defined. It has an ID of root. This is the default template for the index.html. So you can edit this, like if I want to say that this is the to-do app for the title, I can do that. Save this, make sure that it's working. And I forgot something, so let me pull up the console. Let's see. Just gonna double check what we got in our app file. So we have export default app. So what I suspect is going on here is because I had this running while I deleted the initial files, they're still cached in memory, and that's messing things up. So I'm just gonna restart my Create React App server here. Oh, you know what? Nope, there we go. That's the error. It's telling me on line 5 that I tried to use React DOM as a function here, but I needed to say React DOM.render. Okay, so we get our app component loading something on the page. So where I would go from here as I start mapping things out is I would start thinking about the components I'm going to need. So I'm going to need a to-do component and a to-do list component, and give myself a functional component here called to-do. And I would write a comment to say a to-do represents a single task and should have a checkbox to toggle the task between complete and incomplete states. And give myself a to-do list component here and do the same thing. A list of to-do components that can optionally be filtered by the user to show all tasks, only incomplete tasks, or only complete tasks. And as I'm working on mocking these components, like here, there's just placeholder text in all of these components. So what I might do is come back over to my app and start putting them on the page here. So maybe to-do list. I'm going to render that in my app and see that to-do list shows up. And then what I might do is start mocking these individual components in a very rudimentary way. So I might have my to-do that is a list item, and inside the list item is my input of type checkbox, and it's going to have some props that come in. Whoops, props, and I want to get the children. And so I might put whatever gets passed in here as a child of this component right here next to this checkbox. So then I could use this inside of my list. I could come back to my list and put a header in here. Let's say tasks, and then create an unordered list and drop a to-do, make some coffee in here, and make sure that I import this at the top. So we can see a checkbox is showing up, make some coffee. I'm not at all concerned about styling here. I'm just concerned about getting some of like the basics working. So what did I have? Go for a run. Go grocery shopping. So none of this is styled, none of this uses state yet, but we can see the basics of our app starting to come together. So what you would be doing for this skeleton is not really worrying about the interactive component, but just trying to figure out what are the components that I need in my application, and can I just very rudimentary mock them in a very rudimentary way using some basic HTML elements. So I've got my to-do list, my to-do. If I wanted to continue mocking this, I would bring in the routing and I would make my pages folder with my settings page and my list page and start integrating that routing here into the app. So that's it for the planning, walking you through this. We've got the whiteboard planning, the Kanban task planning, and then this skeleton of your final project planning that you're doing here.